What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to yet another bonus episode of the Deer Gear Podcast, where I am joined by Dorge from Firenock and Dave Murray of Vital Limits to talk about Nocks. Now, if you're anything like me, you just kind of accept the nock that comes standard on your arrow, or you're switching them out for lighted nocks right away. But do you really know how important the nock is to your arrow? I know I didn't, but after this conversation, I have a complete new understanding of how important nocks are to your arrow. Think of this. Your nock is the only thing that keeps your arrow connected to your bow. And when I asked Dorge how important are nocks, he said, just think of it as tires to your car. So if that doesn't tell you how important they are, you need to listen to this episode. There is some really great information on some things that you probably didn't even know could affect you. So if you're finding value in these episodes with Dorge, please share them with a friend. I know there are people out there that don't understand all this stuff, and it could be crucial to getting the best experience possible as an archer. Now, chances are, as you're listening to this, we are at the Great American Outdoor Show in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in the Archery Hall. Exodus is in booth 927, and Firenock's there as well in booth 919. So, if you have any questions for me, if you have any questions for Dorge, we're going to be in the Archery Hall at the Great American Outdoor Show all 10 days. So stop by and see us. I know Dorge is really looking forward to talking to everyone at the trade show. So come by, ask questions, and have your mind blown. But for now, let's get into today's episode. All right, everyone. I am live again with Dorge and Dave Murray. Dorge from Firenock, Dave from Vital Limits. Again, we're diving into some more archery-specific topics here. If you haven't already listened to the previous episodes we've done, it's pretty crucial that you go back and listen to those because we're moving on, and it's kind of a progression here. You got to understand what previously happened to really have a full grasp on what's happening now. And our goal, we're not doing this just to talk, the three of us. Our goal here is to really educate you guys on arrows and everything that goes into it. So thanks, Dorge and Dave, for sitting down with me again this morning. How are you guys doing?
Pleasure's all mine. I'm doing wonderful. Just a little bit cold in central Illinois here.
Oh, yeah. How's the weather up there for you, Dave?
Not bad. I think I'm right around 37 degrees right now, warm today.
37? Yeah. We just warmed up to 21 from 11.
Yeah, that's the same for us,
cold.
too.
It was cold, but today was an on-ball day, so I think it's going to get cold again the next couple days.
Well, cool. Yeah, let's good thing we're inside here recording. So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, I think we should dive into two extreme components that people overlook and how critical they are. I mean, the funny thing is I'm going to talk, I think today we're going to talk about basic inserts. When I say inserts, I want to clarify what that word means. Because inserts are an extreme wild bunch because like arrow size. The moment the arrow size change, the insert approach and also what they can and cannot do differs. So I think today I'm going to focus on insert that's around 246,000 to 300,000. I'm going to leave 204, 166, and anything larger like the target inserts / field points in a different area, in a different topic. Because when you move to 166 and 204, I think that alone is worth about an episode, if not two. It was that critical. Which is also a lot of people just saying, well, just because you learn how to fix a car, when you got an 18-wheeler on a motorcycle in front of you, it's a different ballgame. Sure. And I pretty much have the same feeling for that. And just to touch on, since we started Firenock as Nocks, I think the first topic we want to tackle is Nocks. But even in Nocks, I want to sort of focus on vertical bow for now and maybe touch a little bit on crossbow and what they are. I think that will be a good starting point for today. In other words, I'm looking at two basic ends of an arrow, the nock and an insert. And maybe touch on simple things like field point if we have the time. Because I just depends on how, it can go deep real fast, but I didn't want to go that deep. But if I do, that's the reason I got Dave and you to hold me back. Well, the first thing I want to talk about is Nocks. Nocks are something that people just like, how I say, I remember you're old enough to remember the commercial, motor oil is motor oil. and people think about Nocks are Nocks. Well, that's actually, it cannot be further from the truth. Let me give you an idea. The Nocks are tires of a car, and if you're a guy who knows cars, I think that pretty much said it all. Because that's the only piece that connect your bow and transfer the energy to the projectile. Okay? And a lot of people in the old days say, well, Nocks is nothing more than holding to the string so that the string can put energy into the knot and then let go. As a matter of fact, that is the first patent that Firenock filed. The first thing we recognize is that we did quite a bit of slow motion photography on what Nocks actually does. It is amazing of what it actually does. Think about it. The knot has to absorb all the energy, or actually more like absorb, will give you the reasonable ability to absorb the energy from the shock of the string and transfer it directly to the shaft. While doing so, you need to make sure the energy is actually perfectly straight. You need to fit the quote unquote the shaft perfectly. Now that's where the killer is. But then on top of that, you want to make sure they're absolutely consistent. Do you know currently on this planet, there's only 2 companies who do single cavity, single mode? Do you know what that means?
I do. I'll see if Cam knows.
I do not.
Well, first of all, there's only 2 companies I know that do single cavity, single mode. The whole idea is that when you mold polycarbonate, which is what all Nocks are, when you mold it, you usually it's called injection molding process. When you mold it, that means you grind some plastic bits into this melting thing, and then you squeeze it into this mold, and then you got a knock. And I know most people are not really into manufacturing process, but I want to sort of guide you what that means. Polycarbonate is a pretty weird material, and most people think of plastic is plastic, but they need to think about polycarbonate in this class. It's very difficult to work with, and it's like flowers. Flour as in baking flowers. The cheap ones are like 20 cents. The expensive ones are like $20 a pound. So the more precise and more chemical balance you got on the material, and the rawer the material, the better the product. But then we now face into a really big deal is that when you go to translucent polycarbonate, it's a whole different ballgame. I mean, for the old timers, they remember Nocks are usually made of basic 4 colors: your black, your white, your yellow, and your blue. That's it. And none of them transmit any light. Do you know why they are that color?
Easiest to see?
No, because those colors are the most impact resistant color. The moment you go to like Firenock's translucent color, you're forcing the polycarbonate to behave like glass. So when they behave like glass, that means that the property of how polycarbonate cure become more critical. Polycarbonate is like an exoskeleton of an insect. It's cured from the outside in, which means the outside part is the hardest, and the inner it gets, the softer it gets. Which means when you make a knock, unlike the solid color, you want to make sure the wall thickness around the entire unit is even. Otherwise, the thicker part gets soft, and then easy to break off, because remember, you got thick part now, which means the inside part take longer to cure, which means they are softer. Now, the next thing you know, say, wow, this is getting very serious in the material science. You bet. That's the reason, if you look at the Firenock knock, like our G-knock, that weight currently at 2.8 grains, it can handle a 120-pound push. And the Firenock A-knock for 204, which only weighs 5 grains, it also can handle a 120-pound push. If you look at any other company, they pretty much stopped at 80 pounds.
Wow.
I mean, like the East. I remember like when Eastern come out with the Full Metal Dangerous game, they told you should not push over 80 pounds on it, and ours can handle 120 pounds.
George, you mentioned something about the knock has to be even. The material does that have anything to do with the flow rate, it being single cavity? Do you able to get that precision added?
First of all,
even
I'm so glad you pointed that out. The fact is that when people flow knock material to knock, it usually from one of the prong to the other side, which is also the reason when you really look at the knock, they say, oh, the knock left and right is the same. No, they're not the same. That's the reason when you look at a knock, you always want to make sure the index on the nock. When you're holding a nock in your hand or with prongs, we're talking nocks with prongs, not crossbow or anything. You look at the left and right side are never, ever, ever identical. That's the reason when you pick up a nock and put in your arrow, you need to know, you make sure the fletching and your nock and space has to match. And most people just figure they put the nock, make sure they align with the shaft and they've got it. But the fact is that if you look at any single decent nock design, the nock prongs are different. There always is a notch or the indication on one side of the prongs. Because see, when the nock is being made, usually the material will come from one prong, go all the way into the tube and come back on the other side, which means that one side of the prong do not have identical property to the other side of the prong. Well, you think, wow, this is very specific. It is very specific, which is also the reason that when you make your arrow, it's not just from prong to prong. And it's also why Biter and Firenock recognize this, how important this is. That's the reason we make a single cavity, single mold. Because see, when you make a multiple injection molding, when the flow of the material will flow into different cavity, the flow rate, the cure rate are never 100% identical. Which means that even in the mold in the same batch, every single cavity will have a slight variation. The slight variation comes from three different areas. The first area is that when you make those cavities, well, we're getting pretty good at it. But when you look at the older mold, anything before 1990s, they are very questionable. Because making a high duration mold is so much more expensive. I mean, in today's world, you can get a mold in China for about $3,000, but our mold from Firenock costs $60,000, and I own 17 of them now. I mean, people say you must be crazy to own that kind of expensive mold, but I want them to be good.
So you're saying that you got a single cavity injection mold. So basically, you're doing one nock at a time. Where can you explain like what some of the other manufacturers doing these there's probably different flow rates that cause this consistency matter, and then in that flow rate, in that tube or that however that goes into, when that's taken off, what happens to that recycled material?
Oh no, we just talked about single cavity. Yeah, we haven't talked about single mold. But single cavity, we haven't talked about virgin flow. We want to right now. I just touch on the single to multi cavity. As you can imagine, the more the cavity you had, the more the flow rate variance. We are talking the left and right prong already. We know there's difference. Now imagine the thing is flowing to different areas.
What's the importance of the flow rate?
Well, because then the hardening rate of the prongs are no longer the same, which means that when your arrow was touching the string, when they release from the string, the release pressure is no longer identical. Because see, the whole process of building an archery projectile is make sure every single arrow that you have will leave the bow the same rate, right? We talk about spine alignment to make sure that, like the arrow shaft, we make sure it come out at 12 o'clock. Then we do all this, and we are not being precise on the nock. So it's like you do all the whole car suspension tuning, and then you put quote unquote tires on it that is of different of different batches, even if they are on the same manufactured date or different wear rate. Well, the car is not gonna drive right.
So not only do we got to have something more consistent in terms of how the material is flowed in there, but we have an arrow that's rotating. So what you're saying is this precision in the nock manufactured gives us a more balanced nock versus something that can be weighted more one side and cause little hiccups in the rotational arrow flight going down range.
Yes, but see, in our case, it's not that critical, but in some company is, because you think about it. The Firenock S-Nock is about 7 grain. The general public is 10 to 12. So we don't have that much of a weight variance. But at the same time, our material is so much more precise. Let me go to the last part, what virgin flow means. As you make nocks out of polycarbonate, of course, the point where you flow through channels, and then you eventually touch the nock. So just like anybody will look at plastic molding, you notice that the piece of material that you cut when you clean, that go to your actual product, which is your knock, that piece of plastic is pretty big chunk. And when you're dealing with material that's that expensive, like I said, some of them are 2 cents, 20 cents, some of them are $2. We are actually using the $2 class. But then another thing is like people like to use different color knocks. Well, do you know that in most cases, just the die, if you are not using a good manufacturer, like Firenock use exclusive, the Bayer Macalon, because see the dye they use, the tune with the polycarbonate, different colors weight the same.
Oh.
And different colors will give you the same identical response rate. Now, of course, things will change. Most companies, what they do is after they take the knock, all the pieces that are left over, the so-called garbage, they will put in a grinder and throw it back in. And so that's what we call regrind. But when you do that, what do you introduce? Dust and bubbles. The first time the polycarbonate, you form it the very first time, everything come out beautiful. And you say, well, you know, after the regrind don't come out 2 or 3 times, but you think about it, it's the same saying. You never ever change every single drop in your motor oil because every time you drink, there's some left over there. And the only way you guarantee that do not happen is that we do virgin flow. Now, let me give you a rough guesstimate over the cost difference. If you use 20 cents a pound compared to $20 a pound, that's 100%, there's 1,000% difference in price. If you use a single cavity like us compared to, say, a 14 cavity, like on the fuel manufacturer I know, well, there's a 14,000 difference in price. If you do virgin flow without virgin flow, that is actually over 60% difference. Because when you look at it, you flow through that channel and go to, say, a knock, that material in that channel cavity is about 300 to 400% of the weight of the knock, especially 166.
Now, Dorge, just so they have somewhat of understanding, because I get this a lot, that the last thing people think about most of the time, at least in my experience, is Nocks, and you got to go through a little spiel with them. Can you tell us about how critical the precision of this manufacturing becomes when we start using the knock in like variable temperatures, cold to extreme hot? How critical this becomes on how it fits into the serving? Because sometimes, you know, you're out there bow hunting with the factory knocks, and all of a sudden your knock becomes loose on the string, and it dropped temperature, and you're figuring what the hell to do that for. But with your knocks, it doesn't.
Well, because that is where the control of the knock and the material science and the material itself become critical. I mean, like most companies, that most of the product will work fantastic in room temperature. The moment you start dropping temperature, things start going really dicey. Because as I said again, the polycarbonate in the translucent glass really turn into the behavior of glass at about 4 degrees. The lower it gets, the more brittle it gets, the more critical the material becomes. And the lighter it gets, the more precise the molding process need to be, and the more precise the flow control need to be. I mean, think about it. For the guys who are the early season guys, got their first year, season is done, they never see, say, 20 degree. No difference. But then when you look at guys who are like me, who hunt until the last day of the season, well, you're going to dip into some. I remember vividly, at one time I was hunting negative 15 with wind chill, and I take my glove off and grab my hand on the freaking tree stand. It got stuck. I'm just glad I didn't put my tongue on it. I mean, those conditions is where your material get critical. I mean, just like, most people think about it, well, it's not a big deal, the string and knock touching. I mean, just as simple as this, until you control, first of all, the consistency of the knock, the consistency of the material, the consistency of the manufacturing process, you cannot do that. And people say, well, I can get a bag of Nocks for something like 15 cents. And Firenock Nocks is $10 for 7. It's a lot more expensive, but I think just like I told you, most guys are 2-3 grand. Ours are 60. Most people, if you rent, say, your injection molding machine, ka-chunk, you got say 2, 4, 10, 14, 22. With the same machine, I'm going to get one ka-chunk per time. And then I also throw away the regrind. So right on the get-go, my nock is about 70 times more expensive in manufacturing process than anyone else. But then, if you do not understand how important this is, it don't matter. Just the same with tires. Some people told me they will never. I remember my old timer when I was in Chicago. The guy told me, if you pay more than $30 for a used tire to drive for the next 2 years, you're crazy. I just went to Tire yesterday. With discount, you're talking about $300 a tire. And the guy told me, if you pay more than $30 for a tire, you're crazy. Well, I must be really crazy then. But I know that I never ever have major problem with the issue of driving on snow, rain, or anything.
Now, Dorge, you mentioned several times that your nocks are translucent. I know I don't know if we're going to dive down the lighted nock rabbit hole today, but that translucent helps with the lighted nock aspect, that it allows light to flow versus you're not getting a whole lot of light going through a metal nock. Sometimes they usually have holes drilled in them and stuff for the crossbow, but I'm sure the translucent does help with the lighted nock aspect also.
Absolutely, but the translucent light is actually a more critical part. I remember the times we're doing the Firenock DOD project, which is called the instant runway, just to maintain the translucency of the light. When we shoot out of a Harrier out of a Gatling gun, we had to put a piece of felt so that when the gunpowder burns, it doesn't burn the inside of the lighted nock, so you can't pass light. That's why we put a piece of felt on it. But the translucent also have a lot of better property, because translucent nock, in some cases, you can see the imperfection. That means that you are getting a higher quality nock. And translucent also have a softer core. And very like perfect glass. Perfect glass, you can see through it perfectly. But do you know that it's actually stronger than glass that got bubbles or whatever? Or just like if you remember the old days that we still have Coca-Cola bottles, when they reuse the glass like how many times? The glass got bubbles, got dust and everything. They now have to go through a full refinery, right? And get raw glass. And wow, you got something that, look at this beautiful bottle. It is not just beautiful, it's matter of safety. Okay? Imagine you go with glass that got a lot of blemishes and also impurity in it, and you pour hot water or cold water, that glass have a chance to crack or just simply blow up. In the case of the nock, the exact theories apply. Now, and people also forgot, in today's bow is different from the old days. The old days, the bow take one shot at the shock, and that's the end of it. Because we're doing a traditional bow. Say the bow is 70 pounds. It's 70 pounds downwards. Now, when you do a, say, high let off compound bow, say you're 70 pounds with a 20% let off, you have 14 pounds. And then you go to 70 pounds. But this time it's not a hit, but a continuous pressure, and then drop. If you look at every single magazine who do power curve of a compound bow, in the old days, if you look at recurve, it's a slope with a slight curve from one high side to the low side, and that's the end of it. But now on the compound bow, especially high level compound bow, is first of all, we start on the lower side, which is like 14 pounds on the 70 pound bow. It shoot all the way up to 70 pounds. And then it plateaued for a distance of time. Then it dropped down, which means your nock is not handling one shot pressure. It's having the pressure applied to it over the duration. Well, if you think about it, it's different between a point and a line. A point is 1 point. How many points are there on a line? I mean, mathematically, it's infinite. But then we also talk about the time the knot is being compressed. That means in the case of a compound bow, the duration of time from that highest point is easily 40 times longer.
Huh.
Just sort of sit back and think about it. I mean, of course, different bow design will cause it. I mean, the lowest you're looking at is about 25. The highest is close to. But of course, the longer you apply pressure, the more power you can apply to the bow. But at the same time, the more power the nock and the arrow have to handle.
Dorge, can you explain a little bit about the compression aspect of your nock to where, you know, we can use your S nock in say a 246 or down as low as like a Carbon Tech Cheetah, which would be like in that 243 range, just from a versatility aspect, because some of the other nocks, from my understanding, that you may only it may only work for about a thousandth of a variance or half thousandths, and then that's it. Right?
Oh gosh, we are going to a rabbit hole right now. Unlike other companies, unlike when people say 246, or they call it the 8mm arrows, or somebody call it 7mm, I call it 8, because that's the OD of the shaft. The idea of the shaft is called a 244 class. If you use the traditional SAE, which is American Engineering Standard, you actually will make an arrow around 246,000. And then you look at all the companies who go metric, like Carbon Express, and some of the Eastern, they are 244,000. And Black Eagle make their carnet for 245,000. In the case that the smallest, of course, is a Carbon Impact. Their fast shaft is actually 242,000. And for the people who like to use the Carbon Force from PSC, those are 243,000.
All standard shaft.
Huh?
Or all standard shaft.
They are all standard shaft. That means
there's no
small
among them. There's no standard.
No, that is no standard.
That's the point.
So I mean, of course, we got companies who actually do a little bit on the wider side. And then when you look at some of the widest, which the widest I ever seen is on the element what do you call it, the element shaft is actually closer to 247, and I do have seen a few in 248.
Quick.
Now then you ask yourself this question: when you pick a nock, every company only have one small issue. They can just make the nock to fit the shaft. Period. They don't have to deal with anybody. Well, if you notice, you're talking to a company called Firenock. So when we make nocks the very first time, I got enlightened. Because at first I just simply go and say, oh, I would just talk to my good buddy in Gold Tip and say, hey, Marvin, can you just sell me some nocks? Sure. You send me some nocks. I try to put them in Carbon Express. I say, oh my God, what I put myself in? It doesn't fit. How can it don't fit? Doesn't fit all at 246? No. So I say, then of course I find out that it's shaft even smaller than 244. I mean, in the case of Carbon Force and Carbon Impact, they go all the way to 242. So what do you do about it? Well, I can't just make the nock for every single size out there, because remember, we're talking 242, 243, 244, 245, 246, and beyond. So right at the get-go.
That's a lot of expensive molds too, at 60 grand a pop.
Exactly. So if you look at my first ever utility patent, it's on Firenock nock design. So compared to a normal guy who make a nock that fit 1,000, I need to force my nock. I need to train my nock so that you handle no less than 4,000 to 5,000 variants. You say, how do I do that? Well, you need to now teach polycarbonate how to behave like springs. And that's what I did. Because remember, we start with a very expensive polycarbonate that we know is soft in the middle. And remember, there's one job the nock have to do, is that the nock have to hold the string and let go of the string. And some people say, oh, let's go with the metal. What the metal do? Metal is quick at holding a specific shape, precisely, if you CNC machining. But it's not good at bending, especially in lightweight material class. I mean, can you go make metal bend like crazy? Absolutely. You go nickel titanium and something like that, you can do wonders. But do you really want to pay $25 for a nock? Okay, and what are the benefit of $25 a nock? Not much. But that said, just for public consumption, Firenock is going to have a metal nock very soon.
Can't
But
wait.
that's for crossbow. Now, just give me a hint. When you deal with a nock and a string, just say the all Firenock vertical bow is based on 112.5 thousand. That means if you got a string that's not 112,000 precisely, all the Firenock, your G knot, your A knot, your S knot, your V knot is not going to clip on it correctly. That's the original AMO standard. Instead, of course, the target when you look at Eastern is 88,000 and 98,000, but in hunting it's about 112. But then you go into a situation. I mean, I remember one time I was shocked because the guy put a Firenock nock on it and the nock just split in half. I say, what happened? Then I look at the guy's string because at one point, the thickest string I ever measured is on a Martin bow out of factory at 137 thousandths. Yes,
Wow.
You hear me right.
Wow.
And my knot is to hold 112. Now, in the case of S knot, it can hold up to 125,000. Now, this is another thing. Most people don't understand knocks because like if you use a Firenock you Firenock say a Vnock for hunting. On a normal drop wheel rest, your string should be 112,000. But then when you're going to do spot and stock, you should put your string at closer to 120,000 because you want the nock to hold tighter. But then if you are using that, say on the NFAA open field 3-spot vertical spot shoot, your string at that moment should be around 98,000. Now most people never thought through it because think about it. If your knot is holding your string tight and your point weight is low, when you do say an ASA, when you pull your bow back, you're going to float that point very easily. So that's the reason the nock is, first of all, I need to control what I can control, but then I need to educate what I cannot control. As a matter of fact, I got so mad with the situation of the string serving. I actually go ahead and design a string serving jig so I can help people rectify it. And most people think, oh, I'm just like if you talk to Roe, talk to American Bass, talk to Vapor Trail, they will tell you the serving of a string with your knot that control correctly, you can make the arrow turn left and right just by changing servings. And people say, oh, my arrow naturally turn left. Oh, my arrow naturally turn right. The fact is that you can just change the way you put the serving on. You can force the arrow to turn left or right.
Interesting. I always thought that was torsion.
No, that torsion have that factor too. That's the
Okay.
reason, every single problem you see, there's multiple cause. And everybody thought there was one. No, that's the deeper you dive into it, in certain conditions, one will override the other. Like when you get, just like when we talked in the last 2 episodes, when your manufacturing process of arrow is quote unquote more angled and the resulting of torsion, that will cause the arrow to turn left or right because of the holding of the knot. But at the same time, you also the serving of the string can also cause the arrow to turn on the left or right. So now, just like because you have one problem that you want to solve, there may be multiple causes.
So you're not only have a wide variety in tolerance as far as fitting into shafts, but also on the throat end of the nock, we have room to play also with the nock fit on the serving, within reason. Just say I always use the rule of thumb of 5 thousandths
Right.
unless we get in a crossbow where there's situations like I know like the Death Stalker, some of them bows just like a U-Nock to fit really tight on like 142 thousandths, and that just ends up being the proper the proper ingredient for that bow.
Well, just another thing, a lot of people say Firenock make knocks for specific company. The answer is just no. I mean, like on a crossbow size, I make knock that's 100 in 10,000 increment. Like the Vnock is 110,000, and the U and the U is the C is 120,000. Then we go into U, that's 130,000. Then you go to the Q, it's 140,000, and then J is 155, and finally the D is 165,000. So we cover pretty much 500,000, 50,000 right there.
Now on your Nocks, when you go to put them in, we don't need glue or anything, and you got these ridges on there. Can you tell us a little bit about? There's a few of them on there. What do they do?
Yeah, that is where the magic is. You notice every other company, if you look at a circle, the ridges that they put on usually 6. The ridges are on the 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, you're around 2:30 and your 4:30 point. In other words, they are 60 degrees apart from each other. That means when you do that, when you push it inside the shaft, it all applies even pressure, which is great, but it doesn't work for us. You know why? Because like another company, they make nock for one shaft. That's their shaft. We have to make nock that work in every shaft. So unlike others, our pattern process is that imagine you got a clock, and our ridges are actually taller. At the same time, they are placed very differently. They are placed at 100 degrees from each other, not 60. And use only 4 of them. The reason you do that, you said, imagine if you compress it, I'm forcing the entire nock from a circle to an oval. And that ovaling process of the nock is what I'm able to cover 5,000 in the S nock, and cover like 1,500 in the G nock. And I tried. I mean, we are covering close to 7,000 in the A nock, which is an exercise.
Now now not to dive too much into this because I'm probably sure we're going to have like a whole target segment, but the arrow bushing, that has its own capture and effect of the shaft because you put it in there and it kind of grabs the shaft on the arrow.
Yes, actually, that's the only way I can teach a metal to go into a round shaft. As a matter, a few companies did that, but they did not do it extensively. It's called the square peg in the round hole approach. But if you really look at the Firenock S-Nock, it's technically a square peg because I'm only using 4 points, which is a rectangular peg going into a hole. At that moment, instead of the shaft giving, the nock polycarbonate is giving because I'm turning a circle into an oval. In the ovaling process is where you can pick up different sizes. But then itself, you say, what happened if you go to ACC 360? Now you're doing a 240,000 size. The reason that I make ridges is that the ridges are not just for looks, they also have utility in it. Because see, I make the ridges in 2 different steps. If you shave the steps of the S-Nock, it will give you exactly 240,500. Guess what? That fit the ACC 360. Because see, when I come out that time, ACC 360 is one of the more important arrow. And you can possibly make 242,000 to fit 240,000.
So also on your nock, just to point out, you can buy your nocks just as a nock to use, but they're also compatible to receive the lit functions. As far as they got them, you manufacture them with the holes on each side to receive the circuit end, which is a pretty big benefit.
Yeah, because if I'm going to spend that kind of money, like 60 grand on the mode, and then if I'm going to spend engineering effort, I want to do everything. I mean, most people don't understand. If you look at all the top shooters like Tim Gillingham or Levi Morgan and everybody, when they shoot a target, when they pull the arrow from the target, what do? They check the shit off the nock. Yes, they do. And like Tim will pull out his pin nock, hold the pin, spin, 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 look at the nock, spin, 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 put the nock on the string, click, 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 and then everything's good. Then he go for the next shot. Well, if you are not careful, do you think you're going to hit that 11 ring on the next shot? That's how critical nock is, because that's something going to screw up. You're pushing, all the power is going to the nock and then go down. It's just like most people don't know. Like in car racing, for a racing team, they will use a trailer full of tires in just one race event. Yes, there's only 4 tires on the car, but the guys will use a full trailer worth of tires for one event. And most people say, oh, I got this knot. I shot through 5 animals, 3 years. I say, great. It's like, yep. You drove your car for 100,000. It is smoother than smooth. You can still drive it. Wait until it rains and snow. Because see, in the event of a hunting, nutrition archery hunting, it is not what could have happened or what normally happened. It's what when shit happens, you want to be able to handle it.
So are you suggesting that you should change your Nocks year after year?
No, I'm actually saying that in the case of Firenock, the moment you shoot through an animal, the moment the arrow touched the ground, not on a target, the moment you have a possibility of a touching of a nock, you replace that sucker regardless.
Okay.
Because it is one of the most important of safety. Because think about it, if the nock blows up, in the case of a crossbow, you're talking at least $300-400. We're talking cam, strings, or more. I mean, those money is aside. In the case of a vertical bow, if the nock gives, I mean, right now we got good arrows, they break in pieces, they may just simply slap your hand or maybe make you a bruise. But if you're older time like demons, you're going to see about like 50 fragments of carbon in your hand, or in your arm, in your wrist. It's really beyond scary. That's because a nock failed. And then when it fell miserably, it caused the arrow shaft to split, or in the case of crumble and spur. But of course, the new generation arrow shaft, like our arrow weave, they will cut in pieces like tempered glass, which the damage is minimum. But do you still want to go through that? Answer is no.
George, I've seen a number of shooters like in the target area. They're going to use a 166 nock on a pin bushing, but I see a lot of these nocks that are the typical factory nocks have an extremely tall nock seat, I guess you could say, whereas your G nock is very low. It doesn't go on the pin nock at a 166. You know what I'm saying? But can you say anything about how that benefits having a low nock seat versus something tall? I said that
well,
right.
actually, that is one of the design. You notice, when I designed the Firenock S nock, that was the first time and the only attempt I ever had is have the LED sticking out as far as I could. Okay, but then I learned one thing: polycarbonate as a material is nowhere as strong as a carbon. So the shorter the nock, the less need to handle and transfer. Because see, just like if you remember Carbon Express crossbow boat, the freaking nock head was gigantic. The reason for that because see, they have fiberglass in their shafts, so that when they shock it, you need the polycarbonate to absorb the shock before it hit fiberglass. But in the case of all the high grade carbon shaft, you want to transfer that force to the shaft ASAP. You don't want the nock to load the power. That's the reason you notice my A nock, my A nock, my G nock, and so on. They are all extremely short from the nock throw to the shaft. Which I mean, I'm so flattered that a few companies already start following that lead after I did that in 2007. Well, that's what 13 years now, 14, 15 now. They finally following that lead and make all their new nock with a really short nock to the shaft. Because by making the nock shorter, which means that you are getting more out of the carbon, you also transfer much better. Because see, a nock eventually, when you got a tall and long nock, the force is going through that nock, have a longer chance of redirect.
But when on your nocks, just getting back to the holes in the barrel from where the circuits clip in at, one of the benefits, in utilizing your lighted nock system in that nock is that, and this is in relation to what we're just talking about, is the weight factor is not thrown back at the end. The dynamic of the weight is placed more towards the center of the shaft, which has it won't feel heavy to the shaft.
Oh yeah, that's called the FOC weight. Just like our A nock, a final access nock, the FOC weight and the G, especially I would just a G nock. The FOC weight based on the 29-inch arrow, the effect is only 8 grain. In the A nock is 12 grain. But the fact is that the nock actually by itself is 22 grain. Because see, unlike other company, the entire system is sticking all the way to the back with a big battery. Our battery are actually 2 inch away from the nock in the front. So the front of center weight distribution is totally different. But then we also give people the train effect because now we got the entire thing in linear fashion. So when the arrow hits, all the way will go forward like a train with different carts behind it. So when you hit, all the force will eventually still follow. In other words, the more you understand how we design it, the more you appreciate how come it works so well. Because it takes away all the downside of what the arrow supposed was you do not want to do and give you more.
So real quickly, can you kind of summarize in the easiest way what could go wrong with having a poorly designed nock compared to...
We haven't even touched the fact is that a poorly designed throw.
That's what I'm talking about, where it sticks out like 2 feet past the end of the arrow. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I know that everybody, we're on video here, but he has one of them tall nocks that I was telling you about. It sticks out real far.
Yeah, because see, another thing is that if you notice, one of the major patent and claim of the Firenock nock is that we are the only nock company who make a nock that will grab the string and actually only grab it once. That means from the moment the string release, the nock will touch the string once. Do you know some company on our high-speed camera, we saw the nock touches the string 11 times, bounce off the string, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, and then come out. Some of them will bounce to the left, to the right, and to the left. When you have, think about it. That's a total unreasonable assumption that they will shoot the same when the nock actually bounce off the string more than once. I mean, it's like imagine.
The chances of that happening the same way every time are pretty minimal.
This goes impossible. And not to mention, see, I already take the time into making the materials right. I make sure the molding is right. Now we're talking the nock throw design, because if you look at Firenock first utility pattern on the nock, we emphasize totally on how the nock throw interact with the string. I mean, the fact is that if we look at most of the nock prongs itself, it comes out parallel. And sometimes the nock prong has got multiple grooves on it. Now, when you shoot that string is going to touch every part of that top groove, isn't it? So how do you guarantee the string go in straight out from the nock?
Yeah, you can't.
You couldn't. And then if the nock prong is parallel, like two of the company I know they did it, that means the string is dragging on that two surface. How can you guarantee to be right? But when you look closer, look at the Firenock nock design, is that the left and right actually is angled outwards. That means the moment you pass the shear, which I call it the shear, it's like a trigger shear of a gun. The moment you pass that nock throat and pass the shear point, there's no touching. It's gone. I mean, as a matter of fact, I remember back in 2007, I did quite a few tests. I told people, pull your arrow with the Firenock nock on it, shoot it through the chronograph. On the case of Eastern, Gold Tip, and also Boning, on every one of them, the Firenock nock change alone will give people 1 feet per second faster on the chrono. That's something you can actually measure. And this is not a joke. Pretty wild, isn't it?
That
is.
Because see, that's the reason I know that was such an important part. Because see, that was what I discovered when I first designed the nock itself. That's the reason we spent so much effort. To be frank with you, to design the original Firenock nock, because at that moment we're using a magnetic system. The Firenock S nock is one of the most expensive mold I make, because instead of a 3-piece mold, it's a 5-piece mold. That means the left, right, up, down, back. While most of the nock is up, down, back. 3. This is freaking 5.
Dorge, did you want to go into the inserts at all today, or do you want to?
I don't think so, because the more we're talking to the nock, I want to sort of finish the nock all by itself. And most people just don't think there's that big a deal in the nock.
No,
but when you dive into it,
I had no idea the importance of it. I mean, that is not even a thought to replace the Nocks or to consider what Nocks come on the arrow. I just buy the arrow and then I worry about the inserts. I worry about the broadheads. I worry about the vanes, and the Nocks, just whatever fits is what I use. I had no
Yeah,
idea that there were any like differences.
yeah, and that's the reason when most people who buy their bow, I told them, you want to use Firenock knock? You know our knock is engineered precision. In other words, it's not like the old days when you buy a tire. It's about right. You just go ahead and slam it on it. But in the current compound bow world, you want to buy, actually 90% of the time that I told people when you buy from American Best, Paper Trail, whatever, make sure you tell them you're using a Firenock knock. Then they will absolutely perfectly match with your knock. Just like in today's high-speed car world, would you buy a 22 rim to fit a 20-inch tire? You absolutely would not. I mean, you won't even get an equivalence of European tire that's close enough. You know that it's not going to work right. But then why would you just go ahead and get a string from somebody who don't know what they're doing? Because remember, a lot of company try to make it work for all the other string company. Their knot is so soft that prong can handle 30,000. Yes, they can handle 30,000, but imagine the stress on the knot and what the knot had to do with the knot prong and what happened when temperature change. Your knot consistency is going to, remember, the moment when the knot go onto the string and the temperature is wrong and it's oversized, you're continuous putting stress on the knot. You're just splitting it. And the moment you apply quote unquote pressure, it's going to give. But then that's also one reason that we will never suggest anybody to say, oh, I would just go ahead and drill the knot, cut the knot, shave the knot. You cannot do anything to a knot. Remember, a knot is actually cured from the outside in. So it's an exoskeleton of the entire, you imagine it's a life, you need to think of it like a life piece. The moment you drill it, you cut it, and so on, you're changing the exoskeleton, the hard part. Now, on top of that, when you do all those, you're putting score marks on the knot. And when you apply pressure, those score marks will crack open like a glass, which is also the reason that I say when you shoot through an animal, you change your knot. Why would you do that? Because when your arrow goes through the animal, there's a possibility of causing score marks on the knot. And then when you go the next shot with it and the temperature go low, those score marks is going to be exactly the same score mark you do with glass. Your knot's going to crack right there. Then can you know what the direction of the crack's going to be? It's anybody's guess. But do you want to take that chance? Go for it. It's your money, it's your arm. But my position is that is the safest, most important thing you should do. Change your knot. But then people say, oh, I just paid $10, $12 for this knot. And I use my knife to shut and close it every time. What are you doing? You're putting score marks on the translucent knot, isn't it?
Oh man, I can't even. I'm just thinking how many times I've done that in my head.
Yeah, but remember, lucky part is that most people hunt in fair weather.
Sure.
It's not that bad.
What happens in the summertime when you're sweating all over your equipment, testing it? It's like 90 degrees and you get all the dirt and crud on there. A lot of people don't realize that can score to, put scores in knock too. You got to keep them.
Thank you.
Everything's clean.
Actually, I got a guy who broke the Firenock and then I get it back. Guess what? The guy during the summertime, he always used his hand to hold the string serving. That's another thing. When your hand is holding a string serving, your sweat goes on it. Guess what sweat is? When you dry it, it becomes salt crystals. When your knot fit in your string, it's not right. What you're doing, the moment you shoot the string is going to rotate no less than about 360, which is 180 degrees each way. If you got sweat and salt or dirt on your string, you are scoring the inside part of your knot. Yes. I mean, after 14 to 15 years of doing fine, 17 doing fine now, I have seen things I never thought possible. Because the guy was in North Dakota, he was beyond cold. He shot the Firenock, the freaking knot just exploded in front of him. He said, oh, they shot it all through the summer. I said, yes, you're hunting now. You want a clean, good knot. Because at that negative 17 degree, That knock, when you put the string on it, he was one of the proud people. Oh, I shoot a 73-pound bow out of 70 pounds. Okay, you squeeze 3 more pounds on it. But then that's exactly what happened. If he had put a brand new knock on it, that would not have happened. That's what happened when people say, "Oh, well, I just spent what $1,600 on a bow plus whatever." They're going to save on that dollar something knock and ruin the trophy.
You got a Vnock, which is pretty versatile in the 22 series line because we can put lighted knocks in it, but it also takes the place of a bushing that you don't need a bushing. And if I remember right, it actually adds a little bit more strength in the bushing aspect, I think, actually. And then you can, it's more affordable, and because you don't have to buy a bushing, and you get this knock that you can pop out that's still a compression fit knock.
Yeah, actually, I'll try to save that for the day that we want to talk about target arrows. But since you go into it,
I've been building with that for a honey knock on the 300 shafts.
I absolutely agree. As a matter of fact, do you know that for me personally, last year for my loyal customer wanted me personally to build them arrows. Guess what? Everyone was built on a 300 size shaft. Yes, people are going 166. I'm going 300.
That's a great.
And they ask me why. I say, I want penetration. I want forgiveness. I want the flattest trajectory. They look at me like I was on crack, but I'm not. You need to talk to the customer of mine. He say, I used to shoot 166. I say, how's your penetration? He say, oh, it's wonderful. I say, are you sure? He say, yeah, it goes in. I say, what didn't go in?
And you got all the options on that shaft from the crossbow lineup. We got the endless and inserts.
Yeah,
and
we will talk about that on the inserts. But let me sort of finish up the knock so that we people can understand how wonderful knock is. I mean, I really think that this will pretty much enlighten a lot of people because they never thought there was that much thought to knock. But let me give you another hint on the hunters. You know this Firenock or the Firenock knock on the knock prong? There is a very distinct part for each prongs. You can close your eyes and feel them. And people say, why do you do that? I say, imagine this. You just shoot a buck and you missed. Now everybody's alert. You want your second arrow, right? Do you want to take your eyes off your target and look at your knock and feather to know which way you put the next arrow? You want to stare at that knock and feel everything with your hand. Now, if you're one of those guys like me who have a second arrow or third arrow on the quiver pointing upwards, the moment you put your hand on top of the arrow shaft, you grab the arrow. Now you feel the knock. You pretty much know which way the vein goes. The moment the deer look the other side, you grab your arrow off the quiver, it should be in your bow at that moment. But if you do not have your knock in index memorized and also felt and do it correctly, you're going to spend at least half a second looking at your vein and say which way you put the knock in, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, I've never done that. Every time I look, every time.
Yes. But if you do it correctly and feel the knock, you just save yourself that time of looking at it. You'll be staring at that deer. If you turn around, you're going to froze in midair.
It's funny because I was looking at this knock that I have, and it has that little
everybody does that because they don't understand what that is.
I didn't know what it was, and I was going to ask you what that was.
That's the knock index. So you should always put your knock index the same way for all your arrow. Because remember, I told you the flow of the polycarbonate is from that point where the index side is to the other. So that usually is the side that is harder. No, softer, because that's the last one that goes in. And the other side is going to be crispier. That's the reason you imagine your left and right, you will never, ever, ever, ever be identical. And that's the reason you want to put your knot 100% identically to the shaft. But at the same time, that is how you're able to hold the arrow without looking. You know which way you rotate it already. Feel it?
Yeah. Does that ridge or point or whatever make that side of the knock heavier?
It does, but it was needed because you're never going to make them identical. In such a case, then you need to know which side.
Sure. Yeah.
That is why, because you cannot solve that problem. So you need to find a way to rectify it. And that's how the form is. Because see, it's not just me. This form is on every single knock unless they don't know what they're doing.
Good point.
I mean, I'm thinking Corey. I mean, Cameron. I think that you're like, holy cow, there's that much to a knock. It is.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm sitting here rethinking my entire life here.
Now, and that's the reason when I first talked to my patent lawyer, he was crazy. He was thinking, "Oh, you're talking a knock here. You've got 37 claims with that 14 independent claim on your patent." Now, of course, now I know better. That should split into 7 patents, not one, because I pay close to 11 grand for all the extra claim per patent. Now you learned.
Yeah. What would be the easiest way for you to kind of just in a 1 sentence or 2 sentence sum up how important your knock is to someone? Like, how do we?
It is a tire to your car. You imagine how important your tire is. Do you want to wear worn-out tires? I mean, imagine you go to track racing, somebody tell you, "I will give you tires for your track racing." You pretty much don't want to go.
Sure.
I mean, if you imagine me driving in today's weather with an old set of tires, I'm not even going out of the door.
Right.
But people will have the worn-out knocks in cold weather shooting trophies. You are braver than I am. That's all I got to say. So the end of the deal is that if you really want a good set of knocks, this is one thing you need to do. You need to change your knock often. Know your knock from feel. The moment you do that, you're going to save you a lot of headache, a lot of heartache.
Yeah,
And
sure.
I mean, just find the best you can. Why do you think people pay for Firenock knock? Why do you think people pay for biter knocks? But the only difference between biter and Firenock, we are both single cavity, single mode, but we are the only one who do virgin flow. That's the difference. But biter knock also go with the deep colors because see, they want the durability. But then if you look at everybody who use biter knock, the first thing they do, they change their knock often. So durability is never an issue. Because if people say durability for your knock, you simply say, "I want to drive a car for 100,000 miles in snow." I say, "Go for it." I'm not going to help you.
So is the biggest downfall from reusing the Nocks or using a different kind of knock? Is it the possibility of it breaking, or does it actually affect the shot enough to where like it's detrimental to killing the animal?
Well, actually, yes. But then at the same time, you're talking the person's skill and mindset. I mean, just like the old commercial, motor oil is motor oil. I mean, if you don't care about your car, you can put the cheapest one. That's the reason people use Mobil One or the M soil. I mean, if it's no important, why bother? But the moment you don't know, you don't care. But the moment you know, how can you not care?
Right.
That was the difference.
I'm thinking to myself. Go ahead, Dave.
I think one of the highlights that I always tell people about the Nocks is the Firenock is highly versatile, not just in how it fits into different shafts, but when we're hunting in variable weather conditions, as we were saying earlier, you could be hunting in 40 degrees one day, a couple weeks later, it's the rut and you're in 10-degree weather. You want that to be the same. You want that consistency. You don't want change in your relationship from your knock to your serving, because that results in a change in your shot. So the consistency of the knock in the variable weather conditions like temperature, I think is a definite impact on a person's hunt. They can be, the meaning of you, if you're an inch off and you miss the vitals, you're not taking game home. And then your whole trip is shot. Some of these guys are paying $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $8,000 on a hunt. Can you imagine to go into an extreme weather condition because you're there those days, you got kind of no choice. That's what you're doing. And hindsight, you didn't get to take your game home because you didn't want to spend another dollar for a knock.
Yeah, that's an incredible analogy there. It's like you spend $4,000 on a hunt and you're like, oh man, that knock cost $10. Like, geez,
right.
That's
no knocks cost $10. The Firenock I've decided, because for us, it's the molding process and also the packing process. Any Firenock knocks are $10 for 7. I mean, if you buy 1C, 2C from my dealers, you look at $2. Ask yourself, you just missed your trophy because you didn't want to change your knock. from the last. Say, I shot the last 2 deer with it. I want to shoot the 3rd deer with it. Well, if you want to have that bragging right, go for it. But when you miss that, you only have yourself to blame. Because if you look at our recommendation, every time you shoot through an animal, anytime when you arrow touch the ground or arrow touch anything, change that nock. It's not worth the consideration because this is your sport.
How many times do you think that happens and people don't even blame the nock for it because they don't know?
Oh, actually, more often, especially at the moment when this time of the year, from season go into the really late season, their nocks are so critical because of the weather. And people say, "Oh my God, I just blew my bow." Oh, now it's not just a knocking anymore, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
I mean, you think this is bad in vertical bow world? Wait until you go to crossbow world.
A lot more pressure.
I mean, like if you look at the Raven 500, the 10.505. You think this coming season, if people do not know their nock at that power, yes, you're talking. I mean, the 10 point is shooting about 515 feet per second. I'm the guy who actually deal with the scorpion world, which is start at 425 and all the way to 490, 480. But then the guys are going to pass that, and they don't think about their nock. As a matter of fact, if you look at all the E500, the Raven 500, what is the number one consensus when 2021 when they come out? Everybody got nock problem. Yep. The higher the power, remember the vertical bow world now we have the power duration is no longer one shot. It's a continuous apply. And they are a lot more. So now it's not just the shaft is being stressed. By the way, the heavier the arrow, the worse the nock gets too.
Why?
Because the nock have handled more momentum. The transfer energy had to be more. So the more you get, the higher power you got, the more so and cool, the more power the bow applies, the more the nock have to transfer to the shaft.
Because you got more. You got more resistance just for the matter of the heavier arrow weight. On the other side, it's like sandwiching the nock in between the shaft and the string.
Yeah, you're compressing the plastic, and that's the reason I'm making the nock shorter and shorter so that the entire compression is less. But at the same time, I'm using material to give you that shock absorbing ability. It is like driving a car with a lower car, which means that your suspension to do more. But it looks a lot nicer, and the handling is better too.
Would that kind of be the same idea with the higher the let off too? The higher the let off?
Absolutely, because your power transfer duration is on the higher band longer.
Right. There's bows now with a 95% let off. Some with 70% let off. And that's what I'm thinking to myself now. Like that's got to be a lot of pressure, a lot of force at one moment from.
It's not one moment anymore. It's continuous because you got the whole plateau right there.
Sure.
It's all make you rethink the nock, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm thinking about my quiver right now, and I'm not even gonna lie to you. I have 4 arrows in my quiver right now, and only 3 of them have the same nock, and one of them just a different nock because it fit. And I ran out and I just put it in there.
Because people think
what's your serving size?
You think I know? Whatever.
That was it. I use that question as an example because a lot of shooters don't know the serving size. They don't know what nock they're putting on. It's like putting a tire on a complete like a 15-inch rim versus an 18-inch rim. You got to know what you're putting it on, and when you have that match, you're gonna have a much better shot on the bow. You're gonna have way less aggravation tuning. You're gonna have way less aggravation hunting in variable weather.
Dorge, is there a string manufacturer that you recommend to use with your nocks?
No, actually, like 60X, Vapor Trail, American Bass Road, Joey's, 100%. They all know Firenock is 112,000 for that. And unless you're stocking, unless you're using for target, then you need to talk to your string maker. That's the reason I say that if you are really serious in archery, you need to have your string maker on speed dial because that's one of the most important things. Because it's a string.
Honestly, I think for a lot of people, it's such an afterthought.
Which is
most of your nocks, most of your servings are going to come through and now 112, 113 thousandths. That's what I find some of the manufacturers. Vapor Trail, I think, was doing that, if I'm not mistaken. Gas does that, but other than that, like when I go to order string sets, especially in crossbow world, I give them the Nocks spec, the serving spec that I want, just based off of that, because a lot of the people there, a lot of the string manufacturers, they have a receptionist or something at the desk where you email in your order. But it's optimum to know what your tolerance is on your nock and what your serving spec wants to be. Like when I order strings for the Raven bows, I always request 132 to 134 thousandths. That's the little sweet spot. We got more tolerance on that with the nock, but that gives them a little bit to shoot for, if they go 2,000ths up or down. But yeah, that's critical. And I find out everybody that comes to me, I would say 99.9% of the people, when they first come to me talking about an arrow build, the nock is the furthest thing from their mind, unless we're talking about lighted nocks. Then we get into the issue of, I got these junk Luminock things and I need tools and you need a snap-on truck to get to work with the nock, versus how easy are they to light? I send them my little YouTube video, and within about 20 seconds, without tools, I show them how to click it on and off. And they're like, what? Yeah. And they get the nock, and they're like, wow, that's so much better than me needing a set of pliers and twisting it. And then when I shoot it, it doesn't work sometimes. There's a whole mess with that. But yeah, nock serving tolerance is key. And every shooter should own a mic. Every shooter should be able to calibrate their servings. I think that's critical.
I'd love to take a survey. Actually, if you're listening to this or you're watching it on YouTube or listening to it on YouTube, leave a comment and tell us whether or not you know what these guys are talking about. If you can calibrate your serving and know what your nock tolerances are, because I just off the top of my head, I'm going to go ask Chad after I'm done recording this, and I bet he says no. Anyone I talk to, I bet they're going to say no, because they just like.
If I never even thought of it.
I
never even thought of it. It's just a nock is just a nock, and I'm going to clip it on my string kind of deal.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
That's kind of like saying I'm going to go out. That's like saying if you had a Ferrari, I'm just going to go Ford and buy some tires that went on a Prius, slap it on, and expect to do 200 mile an hour around the corner. It ain't gonna fly.
It's incredible, absolutely incredible.
Well, I'm glad that Cameron, I'm glad that you think so too now, because this is one of the major deals. I mean, as we proceed to different technology, the simplest thing has such implication. Most archers never thought. They told me, "Oh, I'm so precise in everything." Then of course, we didn't got a chance to go into inserts. But when we hit inserts, we got a whole different ball game. Now you know why not. I mean, I'm just giving a preview. Firenock have over 60 inserts for a reason.
Insert is not just an insert. People think, I'll just get an insert,
I think that's a good place to end that, a little foreshadowing into the next time you hear from us. You guys have any?
We were going to go into inserts a little bit today, and I said, I was looking at our little brief topic list, and I'm like, we ain't going to make it. The Nocks, we can literally do a whole other episode or 2 episodes, just when we start factoring in lighted Nocks with the Nocks.
Yeah, especially the new generation of metal Nocks. Oh my gosh. I'm using 7 of my patents just on a freaking nock, and the manufacturing process to it is unreal. But we are saying that metal can't work, but in cases when you're shooting 500 feet per second bow, plastic ends.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Do you guys have any closing remarks for today?
No, I think a lot of people really should, when in the crossbow world, should really talk to Dave. Dave is one of the in other words, he is my East Coast trainer, and he is one of the most seasoned crossbow arrow builder. There's people out there who claim they build the best crossbow, the strictest crossbow arrow, and so on. Nah, people have opinions. And what do they talk about opinions? They're just like assholes. Everybody got one.
Yep. Yep. I hear that a lot, you know. Oh, well, you need a 001. I think we went over this in one of our last episodes on straightness being a sales gimmick. And I just put out a post on my Facebook page just a few days ago now. And I put a little arrow pointing to a 001. I said, you see that? That's a sales pitch. I said, if your marketing basis is on arrow straightness and that's the performance end of your, I said, you don't know how to build an arrow. That's for guys that just can't go above factory. They're just slapping inserts in. They might spine locate an arrow. They're putting a vein on. It's still a helical, but it's, you know, when you're talking blazers and they all do about 15 to 20 rotations at 20 yards for the most part. They're doing the same thing. What are you really getting just different besides you're paying
Let's
double
leave that
for factory?
for the arrow veins. As
Yes.
a matter of fact, 15, you're pushing it. More like 12.
Yeah, well, I did that. I got the video. I'm gonna send that to you also when we see you at the show. But you know, we shot a Raven arrow, and it was in the high speed that the blazer veins within approximate 6 yards, and this is going from 14 to 20 yards, rotates somewhere. I was counting about 5 to 8 rotations in 6 yards. And then when I look at the video that we did before it shows the impact, that was at 20 yards. Well, shit, we got 2 or 3 rotations within about 2 feet. You know, that's just being on the conservative end of it. But it's rotating that much as compared to the blazer vein.
Yeah, well, let's say that for the
way
vein,
slower.
because otherwise our listener will be going to it and get confused. All right, Cameron, thank you so much again.
Yeah,
Yep,
thank you
thanks.
guys. Appreciate it.